A murder that rocked an entire community.
She was out there playing with her grandson, and stopped and talked to the other neighbors and everything, and it's just crazy to picture them not here the next day.
And exposed a broken parole system.
They need to be gone. They need to be removed because they're not qualified.
For months, the WAAY 31 I-Team retraced the steps taken by this career criminal after the parole board mistakenly let him out of prison, up until the moment police say he killed 3 people in Guntersville.
And he hit her in the head. That's the blunt force trauma with the flat back of an axe.
Who are you to play God and decide when somebody's supposed to be here or not?
We will show you the ways Jimmy Spencer tricked his parole officer, walked away from a reentry program, how police arrested and released him on drug charges, and a ranger cited him for carrying a weapon in a state park. But his parole was never revoked. He even walked in and out of a courtroom the same day police found the bodies of Martha Relaford, Marie Martin, and her 7-year-old great-grandson, Colton Lee.
Well, they run him in CIC, the National Crime Information Center, through dispatch. And that's when we found out that he was actually a DOC inmate on parole.
The WAAY 31 I-Team pressed the governor about error after error until she hit the pause button on most parole hearings.
The change you want is for every victim to get notified, so that's a no-brainer. There's lack of supervision somewhere.
Tonight, we take a closer look at how a violent criminal slipped through the cracks and give victims a voice to make sure nothing like this ever happens again.
You guys got out, you investigated, you found out things that we couldn't find out, and you never let up, and that's why we're here today.
This is a WAAY 31 I-Team special report, Voices for Victims. I'm WAAY 31 news anchor Dan Schaefer.
And I'm WAAY 31 news anchor Demetria McClinton. We are in Guntersville, where the murders of 3 people sent shockwaves across the state and all the way to the Capitol in Montgomery.
Governor Kay Ivey issued a temporary stop on all early parole hearings. She replaced the parole board chair and demanded a plan for change that must be finished in a little bit more than 2 weeks from today.
This is the house where Guntersville police found the bodies of Marie Martin and Colton Lee. Investigators say Jimmy Spencer suffocated and stabbed Marie Martin until she died, and then beat 7-year-old Colton Lee until he died.
Across the street, police found the body of Martha Relaford in her home, also suffocated and stabbed. That was Friday, July 13th. For days, people in this small community lived in fear. Then on Tuesday, July 17th, police announced they arrested Jimmy Spencer. The victims knew Spencer. He had visited Relaford's home several times. But their relationship changed when Relaford called police because she suspected that Spencer was stealing her prescription medicine.
When police arrested Spencer, the district attorney in Franklin County contacted WAAY 31's Brecken Terry. Jory Rushing told her he thought Spencer was already in prison, serving a life sentence for crimes he committed there.
That's when the WAAY 31 I-Team started digging into Spencer's past and why he was out of prison. Rushing told WAAY 31's Brecken Terry about the cracks in the system and how Spencer slipped right through.
It enrages me that he was out.
In 2013, Franklin County District Attorney Joey Rushing fought to keep Jimmy Spencer in prison. Spencer has a rap sheet dating back to 1983 for third-degree burglary in Franklin County. Rushing said Spencer violated his parole and received a life sentence on a separate burglary conviction from 1990.
The case that actually sent him to prison from here, he received a life sentence and a burglary charge for actually trying to go into an occupied residence, and the only way they could get him to stop trying to break in was to shoot him. So it was obviously a very serious offense, and it was a lot of violence in that offense.
Rushing said prison time for Spencer did not stop his violent behavior.
There was also a lot of violence in his assault down in prison, as well as the escape from prison. My understanding from the deputies that worked that, who contacted me yesterday, is that he made it known at that time that he was attempting maybe to come back to Franklin County to take some revenge on the people that sent him to prison.
Rushing said in his mind there is no doubt Spencer is a violent man. But despite his rap sheet, he was paroled in January 2018.
In my letter, I even referred to him as the type of person that doesn't need parole, because I would think of him as a violent person and definitely somebody with a number of prior felonies that would not be a good risk as far as to let out on the parole system.
Rushing tells us he was upset when he found out Spencer was arrested for killing 3 people on Mulberry Street in Gunnersville.
The name immediately struck a chord. I was like, I wrote a letter on him and he shouldn't have been out, and I was mad all over again that a small child is a victim of somebody that should still be in prison and still serving his life sentence.
Spencer didn't spend the rest of his life in prison. Time after time, the parole board had opportunities to send him back.
A worker at a halfway house in Birmingham told WAAY 31 he alerted the parole board when Spencer walked away and never came back in late January or early February.
But the biggest mistake came in June. Police in Sardis arrested Spencer on drug and avoiding police charges. The department called the parole board. Again, WAAY 31's Brecken Terry uncovered what happened next.
Well, they run him NCIC, the National Crime Information Center, through dispatch. And that's when we found out that he was actually a DOC inmate on parole.
Police Chief James Harp described what his officers did after they arrested Jimmy Spencer. They entered Spencer's name into a national database and saw where he was on parole. Harp told me what he expected to happen next, but it never did.
Probation officers notified through NCIC by dispatch usually sent a message saying, hey, an officer from this department stopped this subject or made an arrest on this subject, and they in turn will get a message through NCIC sent to them.
Without any direction from the state, the law required investigators to let Spencer go after he went to court about a week after his arrest. Monday, I repeatedly called the parole board to once again ask the conditions of Spencer's parole and why nobody told police in Sardis to hold him.
We don't have a comment on that.
Harp told me his officers who arrested Spencer are struggling because of what happened next.
He felt like if he could have done something else, these people may still be alive.
Brecken joins us now. And Brecken, what should have happened when Sardis police arrested Spencer in June?
Well, his parole officers should have placed a hold on Spencer immediately, which would have left him in the Etowah County Jail for a lot longer than he was released for.
You also learned the parole board did not issue a warrant for his arrest until after he was arrested for murder.
No, they didn't. On July 6th, his parole officer requested that Spencer be made delinquent and a delinquency hearing be held on him, but nothing kind of happened after that until July 19th, when his parole officer again requested another delinquency hearing and requested that his parole be revoked. But we know on July 20th, the parole board actually requested an arrest warrant from the Department of Corrections, and on July 21st is when that arrest warrant was officially issued.
Thanks, Brecken. Now, the story may have ended here in Gunnersville, but it began 30 years ago in Franklin County.
That victim is only talking to WAAY 31 about the parole board's decision.
And they're not qualified for the job or the position that they're in. That's bottom line on it.
And what he regrets about his decision after catching Jimmy Spencer break into his home.
Vermin like this need to be snuffed out like a candle.
A man out on parole, now charged with killing 3 people, had yet another run-in with police.
Disturbing new details about the state parole board letting a triple murder suspect slip through the cracks.
Are we going down the right road? I'm not sure we are.
Voices for Victims, a WAAY 31 I-Team special report.
Our story moves now to Franklin County, and if you rewind about 30 years, this is really where the story starts. Records obtained by the I-Team here at the Franklin County Courthouse show this is where Jimmy Spencer's long criminal history started. Back in 1989, Spencer broke into a house, but the owner had a gun. He shot Spencer in the shoulder, long before police arrested the already convicted felon. A judge sentenced Spencer to life in prison. As we all know by now, Jimmy Spencer did not spend the rest of his life in prison. Now, the man who shot Spencer almost 30 years ago still fears retaliation, so he didn't want his face to be shown. But he did tell our I-Team's Brecken Terry he should have ended Spencer's life in 1989.
They have failed the state of Alabama completely.
In 1989, this man was at home in Vina when Jimmy Spencer broke in. The victim went on the offensive. He shot Spencer in self-defense.
Do you wish you would have killed him?
I do. that's morbid. It might be, someone might consider that morbid, but that is exactly how I feel about it. There is no other way. Vermin like this need to be snuffed out like a candle.
Because of Spencer's already lengthy criminal history, a judge sentenced him to life in prison with the opportunity of parole. In 2008 and 2013, the victim, who doesn't want his identity released, was notified about Spencer's parole hearings. He wrote letters to the parole board to help keep him locked up, but last year he was not notified about Spencer's 2017 parole hearing. And the Franklin County District Attorney says he wasn't notified either.
It's an insult. It's actually an insult to the people in the state of Alabama that go out and enforce the laws and try to conduct themselves in a proper manner, and even the prisoners that are in prison now that want rehabilitation, and they let scum like this out.
This is where the parole board starts to admit it dropped the ball. The parole board originally told me a law passed in 2015 meant it didn't need to notify Spencer's victim anymore. But lawmakers and the Attorney General's office told me the parole board interpreted the law wrong, and now admits it should have notified Spencer's victim in Franklin County.
That's why we have reverted back to notifying all cases on those burglaries. That is one thing that the executive director put down in a directive, that we were reverting back to the old way of interpretation for the burglary cases, that they would receive notifications.
For this victim, it's too late. The parole board took away his chance to fight to keep Spencer in prison.
No one even looked at his record in the proper manner. The parole board let this slip. They failed to do their job.
Our victim still believes the entire parole board should be gone.
Pack up, go home, get out of Dodge. You don't belong here.
And Brecken joins us now. Now, Brecken, the district attorney here in Franklin County, also believes the parole system dropped the ball.
He does. Franklin County District Attorney Joey Rushing tells me that he was enraged when he found out that Jimmy Spencer was paroled. He actually wrote the parole board multiple letters in 2008 and 2013 asking them to keep him in prison. Now, District Attorney Rushing was also able to show us multiple violations where Spencer broke out of prison and also assaulted another inmate while he was in prison, which just shows how dangerous this man is.
And armed with that information, the WAAY 31I team started filing multiple open records requests about the parole board and this Jimmy Spencer case. In our first open records request, the parole board said it let him out because of good behavior in prison. It also pointed to this analytical tool. The parole board told WAAY 31 it uses it as a guide when making decisions. The equation told the parole board there was a low to medium chance of Spencer breaking the law again. After weeks of emailing the governor and Attorney General's office on this case, we finally got a break when the Attorney General's office told us, quote, Spencer was improperly categorized as a non-victim offender. As a result, our Office of Victim Assistance was not alerted to his violent past. This case also raises concerns with the board's risk assessment procedures and whether the implementation of this process is failing the public. Those concerns date back to the Prison Reform Act of 2015. It was designed to reduce Alabama's prisons. That's an actual objective on the parole board's website.
But sources revealed not everyone was on board with these changes. Brecken researched the Prison Reform Act and traveled to Birmingham and Montgomery to plow through the bureaucracy and make sense of it all. She discovered one former parole board member left because of this analytical tool. Brecken tracked him down to get an explanation of how the system failed.
I just did not want an analytical tool trumping my expertise in the system.
Bobby Longshore told me he spent countless hours poring over an inmate's file before reaching a decision to grant parole or not. But Longshore said all of that changed with the Justice Reinvestment Act of 2015. It implemented the Ohio Risk and Needs Assessment System, better known as ORAS, the analytical tool used by the board today.
As I saw that there was a move to place the blame on the parole board for overcrowding and to blame the parole board for failure to fix it. Certain programs were projected and proposed that I could not and did not support.
Basically, the analytical tool takes into account a parole officer's notes on an inmate, among other things, and puts them into categories like you see here: high risk of reoffending or low risk of reoffending.
The analytical tool, which they will tell you right now,
is simply a tool to look at, and it's not a guide as to whether someone should be paroled or not. Whether or not that's the way it's being used, I don't know.
The parole board told us it uses the analytical tool two ways: to take into account an inmate's chance of reoffending and if an inmate's granted parole supervision he or she needs.
The board gets the assessment and they base their decision on the probability that the ORAS assessment dictates for that person, probability of reoffending, and then we do an assessment once they're in the field and determine how their risk of reoffending in the community, and we base our supervision on that.
Earlier this month, the governor put a hold on that system because of the Spencer case.
A few minutes ago, we told you one reason the parole board let Spencer out was his good behavior in prison. But prison records obtained by WAAY 31's I-Team reveal a very different story. We'll show you how the parole board missed hundreds of pages worth of red flags.
Voices for Victims, a WAAY 31 I-Team special report.
The Alabama parole system is under fire. The board let out a violent career criminal serving a life sentence. That convict, Jimmy Spencer, is now charged with murdering 3 people.
The WAAY 31 I-Team uncovered document after document revealing the broken system that let it all happen and found the victims frustrated by its failures.
There is no integrity now. It's going to take a long time to restore this.
One of the reasons Spencer's victim from the late 80s says it's going to take a long time to restore faith is the parole board's slow response to problems.
The board didn't even request an arrest warrant for Spencer until he was already back in jail, charged with 3 murders. WAAY 31's Breck and Terry pressed the parole board about the delay, and the parole officer fooled by Jimmy Spencer.
According to these documents given to us by the Department of Corrections, Spencer's parole officer was apparently duped by Jimmy Spencer. He remained in contact with him, and according to the parole officer, he thought Spencer was still in the Jimmy Hill Mission Center. But the parole officer was notified about Spencer's June 14th Sardis arrest.
He was arrested on June 14th in Sardis. They did alert his parole officer, but that parole officer did not take action until July 6th. Why?
I haven't spoke to the parole officer about the reasons for that. I know that that was something that was done in the internal file review, all those aspects of that parole and what may have gone wrong in that supervision were looked at by the board, and we are addressing those. Any lapses that we find that were in that case will be addressed through policy changes.
We filed another open records request on Spencer's parole officer, Brian Robinson. We got about 60 pages of his records where they said his parole officer exceeded expectations in his job. Yet how did he not keep up with Spencer? And why was no action taken after his Sardis arrest?
And is Brian Robinson still employed with y'all?
Yes, he's still employed with us.
Is he on leave or anything?
Not that I know of.
These Department of Corrections documents also show the parole board requested an arrest warrant for Spencer on July 20th, days after police arrested him for the murders in Gunnersville.
At the end of the day, we as a board, as an agency, we have to understand this. We have to move on. We have to understand that that cases do go bad.
As we dug into this case and revealed each problem, more tips poured into the WAAY 31 I-Team about Spencer's history. We filed an open records request for his disciplinary file while in prison. We already knew he escaped at least twice during a prior sentence in the 80s.
New documents obtained by the I-Team showed dozens of red flags between 1994 and 2017. We sifted through 400 pages of documents detailing about 50 disciplinary actions against Spencer. They range from something as minor as having a cell phone to serious ones such as multiple fights, stabbings, even assaulting corrections officers. WAAY 31's Breck and Terry shows you what else we found.
In total, Spencer assaulted 3 corrections officers in 2 separate incidences. He bit one officer in 2002 and tried to swing on 2 others with a broom in 1999. Spencer got into a total of 4 fistfights while in prison. In 2005, Spencer stabbed another inmate in the back, and in 1996, he stabbed 2 other inmates. Spencer himself was stabbed on 2 different occasions, and often said in these documents he was being threatened by other inmates. Spencer destroyed state property on 3 occasions, and while in a hearing for one of these offenses, the officer said he became hostile and had to be removed. In 4 separate reports, Spencer had knives on him or was found with the material to make knives. In 8 separate reports, Spencer disobeyed corrections officers or was insubordinate. Spencer even flooded his jail cell in 2005 because he was mad. not to mention the numerous times Spencer was found with contraband, ranging from tobacco to inmate-made whiskey.
2 months after the murders of these 3 innocent people, Governor Kay Ivey decided to take action because of what we found.
We'll show you what's next for Alabama's parole system and ask if these changes are enough.
Voices for Victims, a WAAY 31 I-Team special report.
The clock is ticking on the parole board after Governor Kay Ivey demanded an overhaul within 30 days. She wants to see the board strengthen leadership, respect victims, gather correct information on parolees, and maintain supervision of parolees.
Ivey also removed Cliff Walker as the chairperson, but he remains on the parole board. The governor promoted another board member, Lynn Head, to replace him. After all of the errors, WAAY 31's Brecken Terry asked the governor one simple question. Take a listen to the governor's response.
I was able to get his disciplinary reports from prison. He was involved in multiple stabbings, fights. He even assaulted 3 corrections deputies while he was in prison. I mean, how was a man like that paroled to begin with?
Isn't that the truth? And that's part of the problem that I'm discussing with the board members today. There's lack of supervision somewhere.
Brecken joins us again. Brecken, there are clearly a lot of problems. What changes can we really expect to see?
Well, I think some of the changes we've already seen is in regards to respecting victims. We know that the parole board has now gone back to notifying all victims in burglary cases, but it's actually kind of up in the air as to what real changes we could see from this parole board.
And Brecken, what's next for Jimmy Spencer?
Well, he's currently being held in the Kilby Correctional Facility in Montgomery County. That is a maximum security prison, and we know that Marshall County prosecutors are going to be seeking the death penalty in this case.
This is a story that is far from over. The parole board still needs to make recommendations to the governor, and advocates are pushing for more change.
And I hope that the citizens of Alabama realize that they are safer today than they were going to be tomorrow. Without your station, without WAAY 31, this would not have been possible.
That's why we're going to stay on top of this story as long as it takes to help make this a safer community and to give voices to the victims of crime.
You can be sure we'll bring you every new detail as it becomes available. Thanks for being part of this WAAY 31 I-Team special report, Voices for Victims.